Yeah, that's a Finsweet. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of the Wized features speedrun. For those who don't know, last Friday we did a speedrun of Wized, and my plan was to essentially go through all the features from Wized. But as you probably saw if you were in that live stream, there were a lot of things to talk about in Wized. So we decided to do a second round, which is happening today. But before doing that, we're gonna wait a few minutes. We're gonna let people come to the live stream. So in the meantime, I'm gonna say hello to the people here in the comments. Hey Yasin, good to see you. Hey Andres, how was the week? Was it good? My week was pretty busy and nice. It was nice. Hey Sylvan, yeah, nice. I love Wiz. We're getting it here. Some hot takes already from Yasin. We love Wiz too. That's why we're here, because we love Wiz. Or at least we are interested in it, right? Hey Harsh, good to see you. Thank you for coming. Nice. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm gonna wait a couple minutes, and once we start, first I'm gonna make a quick summary of what we talked about on the previous live stream. But in the meantime, if you have not assisted the previous live stream, if you're coming fresh new, you didn't see anything, you can go and YouTube and look for Wiz features speedrun. And if you do that, you should be able to find the previous live stream. This is the one here. And in this previous live stream, we essentially talked about a bunch of things that I'm going to summarize now. But it's going to be handy for you to watch that live stream first, so you get a bit more context of what we're doing today. You still can follow today, so don't worry. Okay, great. One more minute, and then we're going to start. Anybody else in the chat that wants to say hi, that wants to share anything, any highlights? Unlocking knowledge with Wist. Nice. Yeah. You can learn a lot of things. Same as when you use Webflow, you learn a lot of things about HTML and CSS. So essentially, you learn web development when using Webflow. When you're using Wist, you'll also start to learn the basics of JavaScript. Although Wist is a local platform and we try to make things as simple as possible, everything in Wist, the fundamentals of Wist are based on JavaScript. Wist is essentially like a JavaScript framework that it's specifically designed for Webflow and having low code in mind. But same as with Webflow, you learn HTML and CSS. When you use Wiz, you also learn more things. You learn how web apps work, how to make connection, how the relationship between client and server works, how the basics of JavaScript work, the basics of reactivity, mutating the DOM, all this cool stuff. It's things that you start to learn as soon as you start playing with Wiz. I learned JS from hacking around with Wiz. Yeah, that's the thing. So that's the best approach. Hacking stuff around, just trying to learn, trying to build stuff, right? And the more things you build, the more you learn. Like this is completely off topic. We're going to start now, but there's a lot of people who always go in the what's called the tutorial hell, where you just keep watching tutorials, and you kind of learn things, but you don't learn how to apply them in real life, right? But when you start creating stuff by yourself, then it's when you realize, hey, I actually just learned this by trying to implement this feature, right? And this is the exact purpose of today's live stream and in the previous live stream. So just to make a summary, these live streams are not focused about teaching you building something in particular. Today, we're not gonna teach you how to build a dashboard, how to build any kind of web app. Today, what I'm talking about is all the features, all the building blocks that you have in Wist. So when you want to implement something, when you want to go ahead and build a project by yourself, you have those building blocks. You know exactly what are they, and now it's your turn to use them to create something and to learn during the process, if that makes sense. Okay, great. See some more people. Hey, Himansu, good to see you. Hey there, Shale. The Wiz is super powerful. Yeah, I love it. Hey, and we've got the OG here. Glenn, good to see you. Nice. Great. I think that we're good to start. So here, in my Notion doc, I already have a list of the things that we talked previously, and you can see how we had quite a lot of things to talk about. And remember that these are just, you know, basic building blocks. This is not giving you specific examples. This is just explaining functionalities from Wist. So if we wanted to explain, give you a full course, we would need like more live streams, way more live streams. So previous live stream, we talked about, overview of what's Wist, what's in the dashboard, how to create a new project. And then we went through the UI a bit to see what's happening here in the top bar, what's happening here in the left bar. And one of the things that I'm happy to announce, but at the same time, it happened at the worst time possible. It's that between last live stream and today's live stream, we made a few UI updates. Okay, it's not a big deal. Don't worry, we have not changed much. But if you're watching the previous live stream and then you're watching this one, you might notice a couple of things that have moved around, and that involves the top bar. Now the scanning of the attributes is happening here in this dropdown, and here on the left bar, we've rearranged the icons a bit. So now the icons are sorted a bit different, but it's the same icons, same functionalities. Nothing has changed. Okay, so don't be scared. This is actually not a big change. Okay, great. So we talked about the top bar, we talked about the sidebar, and we did some element actions. Okay, so we talked about how to essentially how to mutate the DOM, how to take an element. For example, let's see this one. And this count display element, we decided to display the value of count. Very basic thing. So now when we click this element, let me disable X-ray. When we click this element, we're doing a few mutations. So if you want to know exactly how this is happening, go ahead and watch the previous live stream where I talked about this. Next thing that we talked about was nothing. Okay, so that's it. So today I want to pick it up from here, and I want to keep talking about more features from Wist, starting from the data store. If you're familiar with that, you probably know it already. If you're coming from the previous live stream, the data store, it's essentially what we already started working with when we created a variable to implement the counting here. So this variable, as you can see right now, it's vcount1. Let me zoom in a bit more. And when we start clicking on it, this vcount changes. Okay, this is happening inside the data store. So the question is, what the hell is the data store? The data store is essentially the application state. So when you're building an application and that application has interactivity in it, you have to store the state, right? You need to know, okay, the user has clicked in here this many times. This data has been rendered here. This request is being right now it's being fetched. This cookie exists. This cookie does not exist. This query param in the URL exists. Whatever, right? All this state that defines what's happening in your app, it's gonna always be stored here in the data store, right? The name says it all. So in the previous live stream, we kind of saw what are variables, right? These variables are essentially like little boxes where we can have some data stored. And Wist, keep in mind that Wist is fully reactive, meaning that anytime that something in your data store changes, Wist does all handles the reactivity for you. So if there's any elements that depend on that variable, if there are any requests that depend on that variable, if there are any specific conditions that depend on whatever, so it could be variable, it could be navigation, it could be whatever, those things are going to immediately react to those changes. Okay, so as we saw it, variables, very simple thing, we're storing data. And in this particular case, we're just storing a number, right? Initially it's 1, because that's how we define the initial value. But when we click on the element and this button, we are incrementing this value. And all we're doing, if we check this, it's just increment the value by 1. That's it. The moment that we update a variable, Wist takes care about re-rendering the elements, adding classes, adding attributes, whatever it's depending on that specific variable. So in this particular case, what's happening is that the font size depends on the variable, the text of the element depends on the variable, the class that changed this color, I know that it's not very noticeable, but the class that changed this color also depends on the variable. And all we needed to do was just to update the variable. That's it. Okay, great. Okay, so moving on. By the way, let me see if there's people with comments, but I think no. Hey, teachers, good to see you. Nice. Okay, great. So I'm going to move on. Inside the data store, we not only have variables, we have a lot of things, right? The first thing, as I mentioned, is variables, but we also have navigation data. Okay, this navigation data essentially contains the current link where we are, and then we also can see the specific path. So we can see the full link, we can see the specific path, and we can see query parameters. Okay, so for example, right now we just have this index page, but if I go back to my Webflow side, I'm gonna duplicate this just to show you, and I'm gonna say whatever test like that. Let's create this, and I'm gonna get rid of all the stuff, and I'm just gonna say test. Okay, so we can see the differences. Nice. Great. Okay, so when we do this, now immediately we can already see this page in Wized, and we can navigate through it, right? And whenever we change this path, this navigation data, it's also going to change. Okay, so Wized will always react and store the data of the current navigation. Now, let's imagine that for some reason you want to load a page with specific data. Maybe you're loading a product and you want to have some product ID in the page. You probably want to use parameters in that case, right? And parameters in Wized, we specifically explicitly declare them, because you could potentially be loading the page with many parameters that are not coming specifically from Wized. Maybe they're coming from another app. So to avoid conflicts, we explicitly define them in Wized. So all you have to do is just click here, and I'm going to say foo, whatever. Okay. So now we've got this parameter here, which is foo. And now if we wanted to load this page, I could do it. I can come here, I can say foo, and I can say 1, 2, 3, 4, for example. Nice. And you can see how this data is already populated here. Okay, so this query param contains the 1, 2, 3, 4 because we loaded the page with the 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we go back, for example, to this element in here, now let's take another one. Let's do. Well, I'm gonna do it later. Let's keep moving. But essentially, you could reflect this data in an element if you wanted to, or you could use this data to perform a request with this specific ID or whatever. Okay, great. So next thing, cookies. Same again. We have to explicitly define them because you might have a lot of cookies in your page. Maybe you have Facebook cookies, you have Google tag cookies, you can have a lot of things. But we can explicitly define cookies too. So if I come here and I say my token, okay, let's imagine that we have an access token and we want to store this. We can define a name for the cookie. We can define a lifetime for the cookie. Okay, if you check here, by default, if you don't specify a lifetime for the cookie, that is going to be just the session. And a session means that the user comes in your browser, in your website, does some navigation, and then closes the site. The moment that the user closes the site, the session is ended. But maybe instead of having session cookie, we want to have a lifetime of 1 day. Let's check that, right? So if I come here now, and for example, let's say that when clicking on this button, yeah, why not? When clicking on this button, not only we want to set the variable, we also want to set a cookie. We can do that. We can come here, click, we want to set a cookie, and this cookie is going to be my token, and we're going to say super nice cookie, whatever. Okay. So now in here, let's visit the live site so we can check it. And I'm going to zoom in here a bit like that. Is this size okay? Hopefully it will. Great. So if I click on this, and now we go to our application, here, let's check for the cookies. Let's see this. And we should have our own cookie. If I did it right. Yeah, correct. So we have our own cookie already defined here. Nice. With our own value. Great. Or if I do it here too, I'm going to click on this. And then we've got our cookie here, that the cookie, because it's persisting 1 day, this cookie value will always be defined here during 1 day. The moment that, this 24 hours pass, this cookie value will no longer be here. So this is probably going to be null by then. Okay, great. Then we have secrets, input fields, and forms. I'm going to skip secrets for a second because I want to leave it until the end. Let's focus on input fields. Let me just check this. Nice. Let's focus on inputs. So inputs. When you define an input or a form element in Wized using the Wized attribute, okay, let's remember that the way that we define elements in Wized, it's by adding this Wized attribute. So you add name Wized, value, an identifier that you could use, right? So whenever you add this Wized attribute to an input, when I say input, it could be a text input, it could be a number input, it could be a checkbox, it could be a radio, it could be a select dropdown, it could be a text area, whatever input, okay? When you add it, like in this particular case, so in this particular case, we have the Wized input added here. Wized will automatically start tracking the value of that input, meaning that, for example, here in my input field, I have a value of 1. But if I start typing, look what's happening here. I don't know if you can see it. Maybe it's too small. But what's happening is that Wized keeps track of this value for us. And remember what happens. The data store is fully reactive, meaning that anytime that this changes, if you have something that is reflecting this value, it's going to be also shown in here. Let me show you a quick example. Let's grab this element here and let's define it. Let's say with my input title, whatever. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to show you one cool update now that we pushed. I'm going to refresh the page and automatically I can work with it. Nice. And let's do set text and I'm going to do return I dot my input like that. Okay. Okay, great. So immediately you can see how this has a 1. And when I start typing, look at this. This is immediate, right? Because again, everything in the data store, it's fully reactive. And in this particular case, the input value, it's being tracked by Wized. Great. Then we have forms. Again, when you define a form with the Wized attribute, so let's focus on this specific form, we can see that we have this my form attribute added to Wized. When you define this, all the inputs from that specific form are collected in here. Okay. And the way that Wized does it is by using the input names. So here, for example, I have my text field that has a name of name, or I have my email field that has a name of email, or I have my checkbox here that has a name of professional. Okay, so if we go here in the data store, we're going to see my form that has the name, that has the email, and has professional equals to true. Okay, the main difference between input fields and form fields is that input fields, the value of the input field will be updated immediately when you type on it. The value of the form will be reflected in the data store when you submit the form. That's the key difference. Okay, forms are collected when you submit them. So if I do this and I start typing, you can see how nothing is really changing. But the moment that I submit it, now we've got the data here. Okay, that's a key difference that you should have in mind. Okay, great. So inputs, forms. Let's talk about computed variables and persistent variables. Okay, great. So I'm going to refresh this for a second. Now, we already talked about variables, but variables can be also special. So by default, we've got this count, nice, that has an initial value, nice, and we just use that variable to keep track of the state, right? But we can use a computed variable to implement cool things. Let's create another variable, and I'm going to say double count, like that, okay? And this double count, I want it to be vcount double. So return vcount, and I'm going to multiply it by 2, like that. So if we play this, you can see how the value is 2, because vcount is 1 and double count If I reload the page, you will see it. Double count, it's 2. Okay, that's nice. But if I change vcount, this double count right now it's not changing, right? Because the calculation of vcount by 2, it's just happening once. When we create a variable, the initial value is going to be double, but that's it. But if I toggle this computed option here, what's going to happen, as the description says here, if the find is computed, the value will automatically be recalculated whenever one of its dependencies changes. This means that any data that I'm using here could be a variable, it could be some request, it could be some cookie. Let's do the cookie too. Let's do count 2 plus the cookie, whatever, for any reason. Okay. This means that anytime that this changes, look at this. Well, actually, let's remove the cookie because it's pretty ugly. And let me refresh the page again. So double count now will always be recalculated whenever vcount changes, because vcount is a dependency of it. Does that make sense? Sometimes it's a bit tricky to understand it, but hopefully this will start to click in your mind. So double count, very powerful. Now if we wanted, for example, to grab this in here and said that this is double count display, like that, and I'm going to publish it. Nice. Okay, so now I can grab this and I can say, hey, set the text, and I want this to be b dot double count, like that. Okay. So again, because everything is reactive in Wized, now the double count will always be double and displayed in here. Nice. Okay, great. Any questions here? And cookies can be useful as the persist from page to page example of token. Yes, absolutely. If you're enjoying the live stream, be sure to hit the like button. Okay, that's a message from Gabe, but also for me. If you're enjoying this, leave a like, please, because it helps a lot. Nice. Okay, let's move on. So computed variables, check. Persistent variables. Let's talk about that. So we've talked about persisting things in cookies, right? Cookies are meant to be storing, for example, an access token, stuff like that. But cookies are not really meant to store big chunks of data. So cookies are supposed to be just strings that are very lean, not very big, right? And are used in specific contexts, like maybe when you perform a request, you want to send that cookie, etc., right? But sometimes you have some variables and you want to persist those variables. Like for example, imagine that vcount. I want that when I reload the page, the user can still see the previous value from vcount, right? One cool thing that you can do is that you can persist this in storage. And that gives you two options. You can persist it in session storage, or you can persist it in local storage. Session storage, essentially exactly as what I explained with cookies. When the user closes the browser, the session ends, and the session storage is completely cleaned up. Local storage is going to persist. It doesn't matter if the user closes the browser. When he comes back to your site, that value will still be stored in the local storage. Okay, so let's try session storage for now. I'm going to refresh my page. We've got one. That's nice. Let's do like that, 5, 6, 7, 8. And now let's refresh the page and look what happens now. My value number 8, it's persisted because it's currently being stored in session storage. And the double, again, because it depends on vcount, it's also recalculated correctly. If we inspect this, if I come here and I check my session storage like that, you will see how this value is being stored here. We use some internal IDs that you don't really need to care about this, but we use this to calculate to store that value. If I clean it up, if I delete this like that, and I refresh my page, now this value it's back again to the original value. Okay, nice, great. And now let's talk about secrets, which is going to introduce us to the requests section. Nice. So last thing to talk about is secrets. Secrets are essentially secret values. not much, not much of a secret here. So essentially, secrets are things that you can store safely here in Wist and are never going to be exposed live on the website. So you probably are thinking already about API keys, anything that is related to maybe signing private handshakes with a service, whatever. Anything that you need to store that it's not supposed to be public, that nobody should be seeing that value, you can store it here in secrets. And we're going to see how the moment that we start using secrets in requests, West is going to do some things for us to make sure that those secrets never happen on the browser, never land in the user browsers, so they cannot see it. Okay, so let's create just this test, and I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to encrypt it. So I need to click on here to encrypt it, and now this value is safely encrypted. Okay, now when we start talking about requests, which is happening now, I'm going to show you what happens in a regular request and what happens in a request that uses secrets. Okay, but for now, let's focus on just requests. Nice. Okay, moving on here. So up until now, we've just talked about everything related to mutating the page, essentially mutating the DOM. That's how we call the document object model in JavaScript. Okay, it's essentially all the elements on the page. So creating actions, creating state in the data store, and then pointing that state, tying that state with the elements. That's how we create this reactive interactivity on the site. But there's one key piece that's missing when you want to create web applications, and it's essentially sending the data to a server. So if you want to have users to interact with your web app, you probably want to show some specific data to those users, or maybe you want to make sure that those users can send data to your server to, make calculations, to return some specific results, to just store things on the server, whatever. Okay. So this client-server communication is a very known and well-used pattern in web app development. And now this is what we're going to do. You can communicate with any server in Wist. Okay. By default, we have a few integrations that are native here in Wist. We've got REST, essentially REST integration that allows you to interact with any REST API. We're going to see that now. But you also can use Firebase, you can use Supabase. Soon you'll be able to use also Stripe, you'll be able to use Airtable, you'll be able to use Shopify, MemberStack. There are many integrations that are coming to be native here in Wist. Okay, but let's focus on REST APIs because that's actually the most powerful one. That's the one that can allow you to interact with any service at all, like whatever you want to use. Okay, and in this particular case, just for the sake of demonstrating things, I'm going to use JSON placeholder. JSON placeholder, it's like a mock API. It's a real API that you can use for testing stuff. Okay, so in this specific API, I have here an endpoint that allows me to load some posts, or I have another endpoint that I can use to create a new post, or another one to update a post, or another one to patch, another one to delete, another one to get resources with a filter in place, etc. Okay, nice. So let's use this REST API to load data into our project. So all you have to do, first of all, is grab your base URL. So usually when you have a server that has some endpoints, you have two bits. You have the server origin, which would be the base URL, which would be essentially the domain, right? The domain with and the protocol too. So HTTPS, etc. That would be the base URL. And then you've got the path, the endpoint, right? So in this particular case, we have this path that it's posts. And then lastly, you have the query parameters. These query parameters can contain any data that it really depends on the server. So I'm not giving you like a I don't know how to call it, like something that's going to be always the same because it depends on the server. But essentially, usually you'll have these three parts. You'll have the base URL, you'll have the path or the endpoint, and you also have, in some cases, query params. Let's grab this base URL here. And the first thing that we need to do to perform requests in our application is create an application in here. So I'm going to go to my apps. and I'm going to create this. I'm going to call it JSON placeholder in this case. It's just for internal reference. You can call it however you want. And I'm going to use the REST integration. Okay. And this REST integration, I'm going to return the base URL like that. Now, anytime that I use this application, I'm going to have always this base URL predefined. So now we can go to our requests, and we can call a request something like load posts, like that. Okay. I'm going to select my JSON placeholder API in this particular case. And remember, we want to now pass the path, the endpoint. In this particular case, it's going to be posts like that. So let's do a return posts. And lastly, we need to define the method. Okay, maybe if I have some time, I'll talk about HTTP methods, but essentially the HTTP methods, it's how you tell the browser what type of action you're trying to do. Am I trying to get some data? Am I trying to update some data? Am I trying to delete some data? Am I trying to patch some data? It depends. Okay, so in this particular case, I just want to load data from the endpoint. So I'm going to use a GET request. Give me your posts. Okay, that's it. And immediately we can start playing around with it. So I can come here in my response tab, and I can see that right now we still don't have any results. It's null. And we have some state defined. Every time that you create a request, that request will have its own place in the data store. So right now I have my request, I have my data store in here, and this data store contains the state of my request. That state is, for example, has requested. It's going to tell me, did it happen already? Is it requesting? Or when it has requested, it's going to tell me the status of it. If it was okay, like if it was a 200, a 300, a 400, it could be a 404, it could be a 500 if there was an error. It depends on whatever the server responds with. And then a handy okay that it's going to tell me if the request was successful or not. Great. So right now we don't have any data. Let's come here, but we can play it already. So let's just try to play it. Nice. What happens is that, let's check it again. See what happens here. When I play the request, you will see how this changes in here. So it's going to be, it's requesting. It happens very fast, but it happens. Okay. And what I'm getting is my result. Okay. So my result in here contains, in this particular case, all the data from all the posts that we have. So we can have, for example, the post number 47 or 48 actually, because it's zero based. I have my user ID, I have my ID, I have my title, I have my body, etc. Nice. Great. I can also, for example, pass some query params when creating the request. So remember that in this case, in this API, it allows me to filter resources. So I can pass a user ID to filter specific resources for just that user ID. So I'm going to hard code it. I'm going to say, hey, I want to add a URL parameter that it's called user ID. And is going to be 1, just to match this bit in here, like that. Great. So if we call this again, now I'm getting just the data from this user ID 1, user ID 1, user ID 1, user ID 1, etc. If we change this to 2, of course, then this is going to be for user ID 2. And that's not happening by Wized. Remember that this is data that the server is sending to us. With Wized, all we're doing is create this request, send that request to the server, and then parse the response that it's coming from the server. But Wized, it's not a server. Keep that in mind. You need to have your own server or third-party server that handles that. Great. Okay, so this basic example, nice. Now let's remember that, for example, here we had an action for list rendering, right? So how about instead of doing a hard-coded list rendering, remember that we had here a variable that contains some hard-coded list data. Maybe instead of doing that, I want to render that list from the data that I received from the server. Remember, everything that is in the data store is fully reactive, and that means that I can access the data from the list. So let's come here, X-ray, I'm going to update this. And instead of using this variable that we had here, I'm going to use the data that comes from load posts. So I'm going to do r.loadposts.data, and that's going to be my data. Now, immediately, right now, we don't have anything because we're still not fetching the request. We're still not requesting the data, but I can manually, for now, load that data. So let's load that data like that. And yep. And we need to also update the text that we're displaying. So in here, list item, instead of setting the text, doing this, I'm going to say return r.loadpost.data, and then I'm going to pass the index variable. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go ahead and watch the previous live stream, and I'm going to use the title like that. So essentially, we're saying, hey, for each of the items, I want you to grab the data of that each specific item. That's why we use the index variable, and then I want to grab the title of that specific item. So now this is what's happening here. We are getting the data, we're getting the items, and we are rendering that data using the list render action. So if I do it again, and instead of using user one, we change it to, user two, we change it to user one, and we fetch that request, I'm going to get the data from user one in this particular case. Okay, nice. Okay, so get request, nice, dynamic render list. Okay, great. Let's, instead of having to manually trigger this, how about we add a button so we can trigger the request? So let's do a button here, and let's call this button like that. And I'm going to identify this to something like with trigger load posts, whatever. Great. So I'm going to refresh the page, and I'm going to inspect with X-ray. Nice. We've got this in here. And I'm going to say, hey, on event, on click, I want to perform a request. Okay. That's how we can perform requests. When an event happens, I want you to trigger this request to perform it. And I'm going to select this request to be load post. Nice. So this means that now, anytime that I click on this button, look what happens. The data is being loaded. And I'm clicking it again, and obviously the data is loaded again. As you can see, it happens very fast. But the data is the same one, so it doesn't make much sense. But that's the thing. Actually, let's change the text here. So this could be like load posts, something like that. Great, let's move on. So talking about events, we talked about events that happen when you interact with an element. So in this particular case, when I click on this button, I trigger a request. But there are other events that we can listen for here in Wized. Okay, so I'm gonna jump to my actions panel here. Sorry, here, and I'm going to create a new action. And this action, it's not going to be a type element, it's going to be a type event. So if we do this, I'm going to call this my event, whatever. Here, we have a bunch of triggers that we can look for. Okay, we've got custom conditions, we've got attribute present, we've got request finishes, page starts loading, and page finishes loading. So let's start with the two basics. Page starts loading, obviously what's happening is that I want to run my actions when the page starts loading. Nice. So for example, I could say, hey, when the page starts loading, I want you to perform the request to load the posts. Nice. So this means that anytime that I reload the page now, those posts are going to be immediately loaded. Nice, right? Okay, like that. I know that we have some content flashing. We're going to talk about that later. But essentially, anytime that we start loading the page, we fetch that request. Okay. We could also change that to make it not on the when the page starts loading. We can do it when the page finishes loading. The main difference is that when the page starts loading, the page hasn't loaded fully. So if you need to interact with the DOM, like imagine that you want to do something with the elements on the page, then you want to do it when the page finishes loading, so all the pages is loaded. Okay, so I'm not going to do it now because we're not going to see much difference, but just keep in mind that if you need to interact with the elements on the page, you probably want to do page finishes loading. Okay, great. We also could do something like when request finishes. So imagine that, for example, we want to, when the request finishes, we want to say when the load post finishes. We don't want to load post again because otherwise we're gonna create an infinite loop. We are going to, we could set a cookie, we can navigate to specific place, or we could run a function. That's another action that I have not talked about. I want to talk about it now. Running a function essentially allows me to run in any arbitrary JavaScript. So, for example, I could say, hey, console log posts have been loaded. Yay. Like that. Okay. So this means that if I refresh my page now, let's close this. Done. If I refresh my page, because the posts are going to be, oh, right. My bad. Let's, because I removed the previous event. Load posts on page load. Something like that. Let's save and let's do it again. Trigger, page starts loading, and it's going to be perform a request and load the posts. Nice. So that happened immediately, and we can see how we have this console that's saying, hey, posts have been loaded. And this is happening only after the request finishes. Okay. So this control allows you to create any complex path that you want to do. Like, hey, I first want to trigger this request, and after that, I want to run the specific function, and I also want to update the variable, and then I want to do something else. Like, you can create this whole complex system depending on the conditions that you create. Okay, nice. We could also, let's do another event. Let me close this. We could also run our actions on specific conditions. So we could say custom condition. Okay, so action on custom condition, whatever. So this condition, it's going to be reactive. Keep that in mind. So for example, we could say, hey, whenever v count is higher than 5, do something. So we're going to say return v.count it's higher than 5, for example. Okay. We can run actions. So in this particular case, I'm going to say, I don't know, I'm going to navigate. So I'm going to navigate. I'm going to go to the test page that we talked about before. And in this particular case, when we navigate, we need to define the specific path that we want to go. You can define either the full URL or you can just do a relative URL with a path. Okay. So now that we're doing this, we could also open in a new tab, but that's fine. It's completely fine. So with here, I'm going to say, I'm going to start clicking, 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 clicking. And the moment that we go higher than 5, we've got this condition that makes us navigate to the test page like that. Okay. And I think that we are having some trouble here. Yep. So probably we are doing some infinite loop. Load posts. Oh, yeah. You know why? Because we are persisting the B count in storage. So be careful about these kind of things because you can see how it can be a foot gun if you don't know exactly what you're doing. Okay. So keep that in mind. Great. Okay. So let's go to my index page. 1 second. Did I break it because of the... Oh my God. I apologize, guys. I did something and I broke it. I'm going to check that. Okay, great. But if we do it again, when we go a higher than 5, now we are essentially reloading the page. I don't know why, but the navigation here, it's not working. Now, okay, nice. Let me see if the people have any questions. Do we have any questions? I guess no so far. So can you guys give me thumbs up or stuff so I can see that everyone's good, is doing well here? Because I'm going to move on. I still want to talk about more things. Okay, so page starts loading, perform request, set cookie, set variable, navigate to, talked about all of this, run function, nice. Page finishes loading, request finishes, custom condition, nice. Last one to talk about is attribute present. And this one is just for convenience. You probably don't want to use it, but in some cases, maybe you want to use it. And that's an event that you can use. So maybe on, I don't know, on cool attribute, whatever. Okay, and I can say, hey, whenever a specific attribute is present, and maybe I'm gonna say, hey, in test, I'm gonna call this cool. So I'm gonna say Wized cool like that. And I'm going to publish this. Let's go to the test page. 1 second. Nice. Okay, so whenever the cool attribute is present on the page, in this particular case, the cool it's in here, we can do stuff. Like, for example, I could say, hey, whenever this element is in place, I want you to console log somebody's cool. Like that, right? And if we inspect this here, because we are in the test page, we got this somebody's cool console log. But if we go back to our homepage, we are not getting that console log because that's the cool attribute. This one in here is not existing. Okay. Okay, nice. So let's move on. Great. Okay, so talking about requests, let's go back and talk again about requests. So far, what we've done is we have loaded some data, but how about if we want to send some data, right? Maybe we want to create a new post, or we want to, I don't know, like create a new user profile. We want to do whatever, right? You can also send data to your server. So let's come here and let's say create post. Let's create a request using our JSON placeholder, and I'm going to look at the documentation for creating a resource. We are here, we've got the base, we've got the same endpoint, but look what changes. What happens is what changes is the method. So you can see how this is something that it's normalized, that it's a spec of all the servers. We need to define an HTTP request, an HTTP code method. My God, I'm mixing words now. You need to define an HTTP method to tell the server what action you're trying to implement. So I want to post some data to create a resource. Great. So let's come here and I'm going to say I want to post to the / posts endpoint like that. Okay. And we also need to pass some body. When you want to send some data, you want to include the data, right? And in this particular case, this is asking me for a title, this is asking me for a body, and this is asking me for a user ID. So we could, for now, we could hard code it. So let's say title, this is going to be foo, and let's add a, what else was user ID? Body and user ID. So let's do body, and this is going to be my body, and let's do user ID, and this will be 1. I don't know, like that. Okay. So when you include somebody, when you include some data, Wized will automatically handle the payload for you. It will take that payload, it will stringify it, and it will send it to the server when you perform the request. So let's do this. And you see how we've got a successful response like that, that's saying, hey, we created some data, and the data that we created is the one that you sent to us, like that. Okay. Right now we are hard coding it, but how about instead of hard coding it, we use it from a form? Like maybe from my form, I want to use my name as the title. I don't know for what reason, but whatever. I also want to use my email as the body, and let's leave user ID like that. So now this data, it's the data that will be sent to the server. Remember that the form right now has Alex and it has this email address. So because I'm creating a post with that data, because I'm specifying it here, form, that data is being sent to the server. Nice. So one cool thing that you could do, for example, it's say, hey, whenever I submit this form, I want you to create the post. Like this is a very common pattern, right? In a web app, you have a form, the user fills the form, and when he submits that form, you do something with it. So let's do it. How about we take this form here, and I'm gonna say, hey, on event, on submit, so when we submit this form, I want, first of all, to prevent default because I don't want the form to go to Webflow. So I want to prevent the default action from sending the data to Webflow. And instead, I want to perform a request. And that request will be the create post, like that. Okay. So on submit, we're triggering the request to create a post. And that create post request, it's already referencing the data from my form, meaning that if we check here in the data store, we check the request, let's reload the page like that. If I come here and I submit this, look at that. This was submitted to the server. Nice. Great. Okay. So nice. Okay. I want to move on, but please let me know if there's any other question. I really miss the after request option from Wized number one. I've been using the custom code from documentation for the same now. Was there a particular reason performance security to remove that? That's a good point, Himansu. So the reason why we did it, it was because previously you could trigger a request from many different places. So you could have, the requesting here, and you would do the trigger from the request, but at the same time, inside the actions, you could also implement the same exact trigger, but implementing an action. So there were many different ways that users could be confused and trigger the same request multiple times. So instead of doing that, we implemented a single place where you can run the requests, which is in Actions panel. But if you go to the requests here like that, you can check the overview panel. So here we've got the logs that tell me anytime that I'm running this request. And also I have my overview panel. And this overview panel tells me my request, and it tells me the trigger. So who's triggering that request? And then also it's telling me what's happening after the request. So for example, here I have two triggers to load the posts. I have this trigger in here that I can navigate to, which is when I click on this element, we perform it. And I also have my load post on page load. That's my trigger. And then I have my request. And then after the request, we've got this event here that it's saying, hey, when the request finishes, I want to run this function. So essentially here you get an overview of the full picture of all the interactions that are happening with this request. The triggers, the request, and the after request. So essentially what happens after it. Does that make sense? At some point, I want to make some updates in the UI to make it even more visual. So right now we have this way of defining settings, right? But at some point we'll have some kind of canvas-like, something very similar maybe to Make, where you can just see the whole flow of things happening. Eventually we'll get there, okay? But for now, we're keeping it like that. Try to simplify things. Oh yeah, you can click those items. It's been like that for a while. We made that update, I don't know, like a month ago, 2 months ago, somewhere around that. Okay, great. So something that we have not talked about is the debugger. Okay, so the debugger, it's one panel that it's going to tell me when things go wrong, like something is failing. No, so for example, let's imagine that my text here for the double count display, for any reason, I remove it. So I get rid of these attribute, or I get rid of the element like that, and we publish this. Now, if we, in this case, I'm going to rescan the attributes. Nice. Okay, so what happens is that now we have an action that it's trying to implement this double count display, but the element that was supposed to be activated by that, it's not existing anymore. So here in the debugger, you're always going to get warnings about things that don't look right. In this particular case, it's saying, hey, the attribute double count displayed was not found. Maybe you want to check for it. We can even click on fix issue, and it's going to bring me to the action that it's failing. And now I can come here and say, okay, so this attribute was missing. You're right. So how about I go back to my Webflow project and I add it and I republish it. And now if we reload, now we should be good. Nice. Okay. So always keep an eye on the debugger to see things that don't look right, that are failing. Okay, great. So now I have more things to talk about that are a bit more specific. Maybe before doing that, I want to talk about Wiz Cloak. Okay, let's move this up. Okay, so with Cloak, you can find this documentation if you go to. Oh, actually, it's still not documented. So forget that I just said that. It's going to be eventually there, but it's not there yet. So with Cloak, it's something that you can add to your elements to prevent content flashes. Let me explain. So imagine that, check what's happening here, for example. See that every time that I reload my page, first of all, obviously, because Wized has not been loaded yet, we see what's coming natively from Webflow, which would be this. This is some text. This is some text. This is what we see. But then, just in a few milliseconds, Wized loads and then it runs and it updates the elements. So here we can see this, what we call content flash, which is weird and not really ideal if you want to provide a good UI UX experience to the user. So what we can do is make use of the with cloak attribute. This attribute can be added to any element on the page. Okay, so I'm going to add this. I'm going to call this with cloak, and I'm going to say something like, I don't know, blur, whatever. You can give it any name. Okay, I'm going to use the same one here with, oops, with cloak. Let's call this blur. Okay. Now, if we inspect the page, so let's open this page here, and we inspect the elements like that. I don't know if we'll be able to see it. Maybe it's happening so fast. Oh, but it's happening. Okay, I want everyone to look down here. Okay, this paragraph that we have here. This paragraph, it's this one. Okay, when the page loads, this with cloak attribute, it's present on the page because it was defined in Webflow here. But when Wist runs, when Wist loads and starts interacting with the elements, what Wist does is, hey, okay, I see that this element had the Wist cloak attribute. I'm going to update the element first, and then I'm going to remove that attribute. Meaning that, for example, if you use some CSS to hide that element will be hidden with the Wisp cloak attribute. We'll see that in a second. Until Wisp fully renders the item, fully updates the content, and then removes that attribute. Okay, so I wanted you to look at this and look what happens when I refresh the page. So the Wisp cloak attribute is present, but after Wisp loads, this is removed. Okay, so now I can come here, for example, in my home settings, and I could add some CSS. So I could say, hey, style, and I'm going to target the Wiz cloak attributes. I'm going to say Wiz cloak, and specifically, I'm going to say blur, like that. Okay, you could just say it's completely up to you. You could target the whole attribute like that, or maybe you want to have different versions. Like maybe some elements you want to blur them, some elements you want to hide them, some elements you want to, I don't know. Can come up with other examples, but any mutation you want to do, like transform them, whatever. Okay, it's completely up to you. But I'm using the blur word, and I'm going to say filter blur, and I'm going to do one rem of filtering. Okay, this is CSS. This is not waste. This is pure CSS. So if I save this now, what's going to happen is because I'm targeting that specific attribute with some CSS styles, those CSS styles will be applied until the element has been handled by Wist. So you can see here, for example, I know it's very ugly, I know it, but you can see the blurring effect here that happens until Wist has populated the content, that has interacted with the element. Does that make sense? To me, this is superficial, comes all the way. Okay, nice. Okay, great. So this is Wizcalc. Is it makes sense? Okay, great. I want to talk about all these things. So just letting you guys know, we're supposed to end the live stream now, but I'm going to go like 10, 15 more minutes to talk about these other more advanced cases. Okay. Anybody who needs to leave, I appreciate everyone being here. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep pushing for about 10 minutes more. Okay, great. So let's talk about some more element actions that we can implement, but they're a bit more advanced, that you can do more advanced things in Wized. So first of all, one thing that we have not talked about is that how, when you implement actions, you can really implement any kind of event. So let me explain. So here in X-ray, let's select, I don't know, let's use the form, or no, let's do something different. Let's come down here, and I'm going to say mouse action, whatever. And this will be some height. Let's add some 32 RAM, and let's add some background, like gray, whatever. Okay, nice. Okay, and in here we can add some text block, like that. Okay, and let's do it like this. Nice. Okay, so let me define these two elements. I have, oh, this is pretty ugly actually. Let's do, let's make it a bit more light. Yeah, like that. Nice. Okay, so let's define these two elements so I can give you a better example. So this is going to be with, I don't know, mouse section, whatever. Mouse section, and this is going to be with mouse results, like that. Nice. Publishing, and I should find this already here. Let's refresh. Sometimes X-ray works weird. I'm going to check that. Okay, so in this mouse section, I want to implement an event. And one thing that we see many people just be confused about it, and by the way, we recently pushed a small UI update for that, it's that you can really listen for any kind of event. So you're not limited to the events that you see here, like blur, change, click, focus, input, all this stuff. You can actually use any kind of event. Okay, it could be another browser event, or it could be a custom event, because in JavaScript you can create custom events. But in this particular case, I want to use a native event called mouse move. Okay, this is something that it's native from the browsers that it's going to tell me when I'm moving my mouse over an element. So I'm going to say mouse move here. And on mouse move, I want to set a variable. Let's do that. So let's do set a variable. I'm going to say mouse position, whatever. And the initial value will be just this. Okay. So the X will be null, the Y will be null, whatever. You really don't need to worry about this for now. The point is that because I'm running my event on mouse move, I can do whatever I want. So for example, I can set a variable, and this variable could be the mouse position. And now I can return some data. So let's do return, and let's return the data as I defined it, an array of 2 positions. And we can we can access the event object. Okay, so anytime that not mouse.com, what the hell, mouse move. Anytime that you interact with an event in JavaScript, you get an event object. Okay, and this event object contains information like, okay, who called this? And then some extra data, like for example, the position of the mouse, and stuff like that. So I could say e dot I think that it was mouse x and e dot mouse y, I believe. Let me check actually. Mouse x, mouse y, I think it was. 1 second. Mouse move. This is supposed to be a mouse event, and the mouse event contains information. Oh no, client X, not mouse X, sorry. So client X, movement X, offset X, page X, screen X. I think it's client X actually. The X coordinate of the mouse pointer. Yes. So let's check that. So it's going to be client X. And this is going to be client Y, like that. Okay. So now if we inspect the data store here and we refresh, we should have Look at that. So if you're checking the variables here, I can, for example, grab the information of my mouse. I can see that my mouse is going to the specific corner here, or it's going down, etc. I can even, for example, update the value here to say, hey, I want you to set the text, and I want this to be b dot mouse position, like that. So now if I'm doing this, now we can see the mouse position. You could do this, for example, to trigger animations, to trigger specific logic. Sorry, depending on the position of the user browser, whatever, the mouse, whatever. So, but the point is that you can really interact with any event in Wized. You are not limited to interacting to only the events that are defined in the suggestions panel here. You can essentially do whatever you want. Okay. And another thing that I wanted to talk about is that the data stored in Wized, as I mentioned, it's fully reactive, meaning that right now I'm doing this. I'm setting a variable to update the mouse position. But what if instead of setting a variable, I want to do a, I want to do a run function, okay? Because in here in run function, I can console log stuff, right? But I can also do other stuff. Like, for example, I can update the variable directly from here. So I could say, hey, I want the that mouse position to be equals to the event.client x, event.client y. Inside the run functions, you can mutate stuff. If I refresh this, yeah. So inside the run functions, you can do whatever you want, including updating the values from the data store, and Wized will still handle all the reactivity. That's important because this gives you extra controls about what you can do with custom code and what you can't. So let's go back here. And how about not only I want to update the mouse position like that, I also want to interact with the element. This is something that is more advanced. It's called the T, okay? And this T will contain the data about the element that it's running that specific action. I know that it's, right now can be a little bit confusing, but what if, for example, I have a custom attribute on this element? I have something like data custom, whatever, right? And I want to grab that data and I want to do something with that data that it's living right now in the element. You could do that with the T keyword. So with the T keyword, I could say T dot, and here I can interact with the children. I can interact with the name of the element, whatever. I also can interact with the DOM node. And I could say, hey, okay, T DOM node. I could also get an attribute, and this attribute is going to be data custom, like that, right? And I could console log it, for example. I know that it's like, why the hell do I want to do that? The point is that you can do it. That's it. So you can just be creative with it if you want to do custom stuff. Okay, nice. So you can see here how we're consoling log whatever a lot of times, and that's because anytime that I'm hovering over the mouse, over the section, I am running this custom function that grabs the data from the element. Okay, not very specific now with this example, but imagine that you have one action that affects multiple elements. And maybe one element, you want to do something a bit different. So maybe you want to identify that difference through a custom attribute. Or you want to, for some reason, you want to mutate the element directly with custom code. All that stuff can be done using the T keyword in here, okay, that contains the data from the target. Nice. Okay, great. So, set visibility, you already saw that. Okay, okay. I think that we're pretty much done now. We could do some last cool thing, which is that you can load NPM libraries if you want. Let's do that. So imagine that for some reason, you want to use a third-party library. Let's use confetti.js. This is a cool, JS confetti, sorry. This is a cool NPM library that's a JavaScript that allows me to run confetti, right? in Wized, you can essentially run any npm library by doing a dynamic import. And the way that you can do it, dynamic import, I recommend everyone to use the esm.run. So it's essentially by JS deliver. And I'm going to say, okay, JS confetti, like that. I'm going to get a URL from here. Okay. This URL, it's the source of the dynamic module that I can import. Okay. So let's come here in actions. Let's create a new action that says page finishes loading. And I want that when the page finishes loading, in here, I want to run a function and I want to trigger a confetti, right? So all I need to do is say, okay, this is going to be my dynamic module. Actually, I think that, let me check 1 second. Yeah. So this is going to be my dynamic module like this. And I'm going to do await.import. And I'm going to add the URL like that. So I want to import this URL. And I think that confetti, it's a default export. Nice. So I'm going to do module.default and I'm going to run it like that. Okay. So what happens is that if we did it right, no, we did not really do it right. Okay, give me 1 second. JS confetti, JS confetti. Oh, maybe that's not the one that I wanted to use. Confetti, 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 confetti. There's another one that it's more, it's simpler. Chemist confetti. Confetti, confetti. No. Confetti JS, confetti TS. Ah, I'm not finding the one that I wanted to use. So maybe it was the JS confetti one. It's probably this one. Yeah, might be wrong. But I thought that this could be called however I want it. Now I'm giving you a wrong example. I'm sorry. Confetti JS. Confetti is JS. This is the one that I want. Is it? Confetti.js. Oh, maybe it's this one. Oh my god. Okay, so many people creating confetti. Lol. Yeah, there are a lot of JavaScript libraries for confetti. Okay, I knew one library that was very simple to use, but let's use a different one. How about we use? Let me try to come up with another library. Anyways, let's use the JS confetti one. Okay, let's not spend more time on this. So JS confetti, the way that I have to do is say new JS confetti and then add confetti. Is that it? Yeah, okay, let's try it. So I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna say confetti equals to this, and I'm gonna do the add confetti like that. Confetti dot add confetti. Is that gonna work? Oh yeah, finally. Okay, so check that. Yay. Okay, so what's happening now? Let me explain. Sorry, I know that I just confused you a lot. What's happening is that first of all, we import the module using a dynamic import like that, and then we grab the default. So anytime that an import in npm it's done like this means that it's a default import. So we grab the default value like that, and this default value, it's essentially the JS confetti. So we do a new instance and then we add the confetti like that. Okay. And this way, you can run essentially any npm library. Like, for example, you could create Swiper.js instances. You could create Canvas, like graphs and stuff. You could do, I don't know, like text editors. You could do anything you want with just defining it inside Wized instead of having to import the libraries in the outside of Wized. Okay. Oh my God. I just had a bad time right now trying to explain it, but I think we're good. Nice. At least we know how to celebrate when we get this right. Yeah. Okay. So I think that for now, these are all the building blocks that you should know about. There are more advanced things that you can do in Wist, but for that, I think it's better if we do like specific guides. Now, the next step, it's up to you guys. Okay, so now that you got all of the basic building blocks, you know exactly how to interact with the elements, how to interact with the server, how to dynamically trigger reactivity on the page, etc. Now you can take all these different tools that Wiz gives you and create your own project. Now it's the moment when you need to learn things by doing. Like you need to spend some time debugging, like what the hell this is not working, like etc. Because then it's when you learn about the tool, about JavaScript, about the whole concept of building web applications. Okay. So, guys, I want you to promise that you'll try to build cool stuff and show that to me when you're done. And with this, we are at the end of the live stream. Hopefully, you like this. So, if you enjoyed this live stream, please share it or give us a like, stuff like that, because it helps us a lot. And see you next Wednesday. Wednesday, what the hell? See you next Friday with another technical live stream. Probably we're going to talk about Xatom. It's not confirmed, but it's very probable that that will happen. Okay. So next Friday, Xatom for everyone. I think it's going to be a fun stream. See you then. I appreciate everyone being here.